Subtitling by Zweites Deutsches Fernsehen, 1301. 2026. We are in the fourth year and on day 324 since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. A warm welcome I greet you to the Daily Situation Report. In today's report, we see burning key industries in the Russian hinterland, a front that exhausts people instead of gaining ground, and a war increasingly reaching Russia's seas and infrastructure, and more. The Russian company Atlant Aero in Taganrog was the target of a drone attack last night. A major fire broke out at the drone manufacturer's site and was clearly visible. And it will certainly prevent or at least delay the construction and production of more drones. That means a very important component within the Russian arms industry was hit here. In the Belgorod region, supply issues have worsened following Ukrainian attacks on energy facilities. The governor openly spoke of an almost catastrophic situation and recommended that the population temporarily leave the region. Since electricity and heat can no longer be provided reliably, much like in my apartment, a full restoration of service is now seen as completely unrealistic. Widespread power outages after drone attacks have crippled parts of commerce, industry, and mobile communications, forcing businesses to a standstill. This means the region is experiencing a development that Russia itself has systematically used against Ukraine before, and in fact still does, especially during the winter months. Belgorod is now experiencing, in a milder form, the consequences of its own warfare: attacks on critical infrastructure, overloading of repair capacities, and increasing vulnerability of civilian areas. What the Russians now have to get used to has been a harsh reality in Ukraine for years, especially during the winter months. So while the lights go out and the heating stays cold in Belgorod, this has long been the case in Ukraine. Large parts of Kiev are also without power after recent Russian attacks, with the available energy not even sufficient to fully supply critical infrastructure. In many districts, the heating supply has also failed, and numerous shops have had to close because generators are no longer working reliably under the winter conditions. Public transportation is also severely restricted, with most trolleybuses and trams at a standstill due to a lack of electricity. With temperatures ranging from around -11 to -20 degrees Celsius, which are expected to persist for at least another week, according to forecasts, the situation for the civilian population is becoming significantly more severe. This time it serves us too. In Kupiansk, Ukrainians have likely fully liberated the city from Russian control. The last known Russian soldiers were located here. At the red pin, a Ukrainian flag is now flying again on the roof of the last shelter in the almost completely destroyed city center. By the way, there are noticeably many Latin American volunteers in Kupiansk who are fighting here on the side of the Ukrainians. You also know that cartels have a great interest in using this war to basically train their people here and then bring them back, because that's the other side of the coin. All in all, the time between pushing back the Russians and clearing out the last pockets of resistance was again very long. The Ukrainians always try to protect their soldiers here first by carrying out many missions with drones and trying to eliminate as many Russian soldiers as possible with drones, before they then, when it's no longer possible to proceed, send in infantry to clear the building. With the Russians, it's exactly the opposite. That's why they temporarily capture territory faster, but they also lose a lot of soldiers in the process. At Sviatopokrovsky, the Russians were able to bring the hill completely under their control. However, they're not making any further progress in the town itself, especially in the eastern part of the town. That's why they're now attacking from behind Ukrainian defenses over the hill to cut off logistics and connections to other subunits, and to force a retreat or encirclement. As I said 2 or 3 weeks ago, the side that can control the hill until the end and use the height advantage for themselves will win this battle on this section of the front. And that's exactly what we're seeing here on the Russian side. From a military perspective, they're doing that very well right now. Few other channels provide such quick, concise information on world events, especially the Ukraine war. If you want to support me, feel free to leave a free subscription if you haven't already. That really helps me a lot, and if you want to do more, I'd be happy to welcome you as a channel member. Reports say Russian General Akhmedov was removed from command shortly before Christmas after several failed costly attacks near Dnepropetrovsk, Ukraine. This is already the second time he has been removed from his leadership position due to losses deemed unacceptable. This shows continued issues with leadership, planning, and troop losses in this part of the front. You can see the images in the background, and we've observed this during several attacks. It's truly grotesque that because of his misjudgments, he caused many losses and was then dismissed from his position, only so that he could repeat the same thing at another section of the front shortly afterward. But what this definitely shows us is that he is not an isolated case and, above all, not one of the big fish. The losses he is responsible for are indeed very high, but not as high as those of other generals, who are mostly still in service. It's almost uncharacteristic for the Russian side to remove one of their own generals because of such losses, since normally loyalty always outweighs incompetence. So for the Ukrainians, it's not good news if the Russians start punishing incompetence after 4 years of war. Just imagine if they had to defend a section of the front, and the opposing side attacks every time at the same hour, on the same road, with the same tactic as the 50 times before. And that's a little dream come true for you, because then you already know how the attack will turn out, how best to position your own units, and how you can respond to the opposing side. And then suddenly, someone who was nicely predictable is removed from their post and possibly replaced by someone capable, but who will get their position is still unclear. Parts of the Russian armed forces are apparently testing a new one-man tent. It is supposed to be portable and provide infantrymen with protection from winter weather conditions during an attack. You heard that right. According to current observations, it is intended that soldiers move forward with this tent on their bodies, instead of using it in a stationary way. At least that's what the description under the video says. That makes absolutely no sense to me. Maybe the soldiers misunderstood it as well. Because normally you only set up the tent after you've arrived at your position, and then you stay there. You don't attack with the tent on you or around you. Or, as the soldier says, it's impractical because the wind lifts it up and it's hard to move inside. It may be better than having no tent or winter gear in winter, but that doesn't mean I'd attack with it. It looks like it's actually a portable toilet tent, and I can easily imagine that someone in the Russian Ministry of Defense or in Russian procurement said, "We need new tents for our men. We're running out of them." Then they allocated some money for it, and the person responsible just pocketed half of it and bought cheap toilet tents with the rest of the money and sent them to the front. I can't explain it any other way. A Russian woman publicly appealed to Putin, asking him not to let her last surviving son serve a 12-year prison sentence, but instead to send him to the war against Ukraine. In her statement, she explained that her other son and her grandson had already fallen in the war in 2024, and she added that she received government compensation payments for their deaths, so if I had to go to prison for life, that would also be an option for me. A week later, I'd be at the front. With some luck, I could desert and survive as a prisoner of war. With even more luck, I might make it to the war's end, even though that would be less likely than deserting. But that would be my own decision, and it would still be better than sitting in some hole for life. In this case, however, it's the mother herself who wishes for it, the one who has already lost her other son and her grandson, that the last surviving son should still go to war, even though he would be safe from the war in prison. The question that arises is she in financial need and now needs another survivor's benefit? Or is it more shameful for her to have a criminal son in prison than a fallen hero? And for once, I'm not saying this sarcastically, in Russia we are seeing more and more of a hero cult. And the Russian families I know, especially those living in Germany, often support the war but despise crime among their own people. And you don't get 12 years in prison just for stealing an apple or being involved in a bar fight. Maybe you can answer this question in the comments. The blogger Tender and also Reuters are now citing Russian sources who are currently reporting that at least 4 oil tankers from the Russian shadow fleet in the Black Sea have been attacked by various drones. Besides the known cases Delta, Harmony, and Matilda, the tanker Friendly is now reportedly involved. Reports say the affected ships were near Novorossiysk's coast. Russia now has to consider the following. Do I continue to risk the tankers being hit and the crews possibly not wanting to sail anymore? Or should I protect them with an escort? But that risks losing a warship. With this question, I say goodbye and thank all components, channel members, and the Algo crew, especially Lieutenant Colonel Rennecke, Robert Stiller, Dietrich Freddy, and Mernhofer. Feel free to subscribe, like, and leave comments, and see you in the next situation report.